can turn a can into a cane? Who can turn a pan into a pane? It's not too hard to see, it's silent E. Who can turn a cub into a cube? Who can turn a tub into a tube? It's elementary for silent E.
This is Antic, the Atari 8-Bit podcast. I'm Kay Savetz. An article was published in the Daily Press newspaper of Newport News, Virginia on February 13, 1985, titled Best in Show at Science Fair, Computer Program Helps Young Readers Conquer the Silent E Challenge. 2 years ago, Michael Fripp wanted to make sure his younger brother didn't face a hard time learning how to deal with the silent E principle in reading lessons. Putting his own Atari computer to work, Michael developed a fun educational program designed to teach then 6-year-old Daniel how to successfully pronounce words like cap, tub, and man when an E is added to each. I remember the trouble I had with silent E and didn't want him to have that trouble, says 13-year-old Michael, an 8th grader at Queens Lake Intermediate School. There are lots of math but few English programs for computers. I hope to bridge that gap. The article continues. Michael went on to expand the Silent E program, complete with more detailed instruction and graphics, through his computer science class at school and entered it as an exhibit in the New York County Science Fair. Michael's educational reading program, Silent E, a program for kindergarten through 3rd grade, was judged Best in Show. We were pleased and surprised a computer program was picked because usually the judges pick pure science, says Carolyn Gartner, who teaches math and computer science at the intermediate school. Michael's computer program involves a simple story outline about an Earthling named Tim and his spaceship landing on the planet Eop, which is ruled by the Silent E's. There, Tim learns how the Silent E's simply and quickly turn words such as pan into pain with an addition of their favorite letter. He has copyrighted the program and hopes to market it commercially. More than 100 hours of work have gone into the project. Computers are like a fever, they grow on you, says the young man. I try to do a lot of programming at home, but homework really limits me. The large photograph accompanying the article shows young Michael, replete with calculator watch, in front of an Apple II computer, not an Atari. I talked with Dr. Fripp to hear all about his program. This interview took place on February 28, 2021.
I had the luxury of growing up with family friends who were a group of NASA engineers. That my dad was in the material science group at NASA Langley in Hampton, Virginia. The person that we would go canoeing with was John Shoesmith, who was the branch head in the automated computational division at NASA Langley. The group that did the computation. He was one of the managers for Katherine Johnson of Hidden Figures fame. And so, sort of growing up, we would go and drive down the interstate talking on our CB radios between the two different cars, doing math problems. Trying to go and calculate how many gallons of paint were painted to make dotted lines in the middle of the road. And each car would do its own estimation problem. And we came up with answers within about a factor of 2 of each other, which is, for an estimation problem, is basically agreeing. So the first real computer that my dad was using as part of his microgravity work at NASA was an HP 85, one of those giant sort of luggable computers, but that he would periodically bring home to let us work on. So this would be about 1980. And so I would be about 9 years old. And one of the things that I was able to do with it was to do the choose your own adventure programs. Mm-hmm. And so I remember the degree of excitement the first time that you were able to go and make, your 5 lines of code that you hit run and it actually runs. There is a degree of excitement that happens with that it's really, I still remember. So that was the first programming. So it was using the HP 85 to do basic programming. The people in the neighborhood, there was a friend who had a TRS 80 machine at home that he never used it, and looking at it, I don't think I would have ever used it either. It was just not a easy machine to use. Mm-hmm. But my dad saw how much energy and excitement I was finding with his luggable computer and agreed to go and help me buy a PC for ourselves. That I was mowing yards as a 10-year-old to go and earn up money to pay my share of it. And my dad was, put in his more than his share.
Sure.
And the choice at the time was basically a toss-up, whether we would go and get the Atari or the Apple PC, that they were, to our eye, roughly equivalent machines, and just that the Apple was a whole lot more expensive. And so looking around at the options and reading the sort of the backs of the magazines that had the advertisements at the back, there were lots of options. We had a sort of a distant friend around the neighborhood who had an Atari 400 with the that membrane keyboard. Sure. And the cassette memory for recording, and being able to go and physically touch the Atari 400 made it clear that, one, I really wanted a real keyboard, something that you could really type on. It was worth splurging to get the floppy disk drive rather than having to go and work with the cassette tapes. And that the Atari was a user-friendly enough machine that even I, as a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, could work with and could basically teach myself how to make it work. So it was in the fall of 1981 that we got our Atari 800. And I think even to this day, that is the most expensive computer we have ever bought. Between the computer, the floppy drive, and the dot matrix printer that we got at the same time, that was a little over $2,000 in 1981 dollars, which in today's dollars would be more. Yes. And so, but thus we got it.
Nice. So Dad helped you out with getting some of that stuff, and then so you got it home, and what'd you do with it?
So the first thing was to go and do the choose your own adventure stories. It's sort of they're the books of choose your own adventure, but you can go make your own, and it's the joy of, you don't need very many commands to be able to go and have display for text, if then, and just very basic branching to go and be able to write your own choose your adventure story. And so it allows you to be creative. It allows you to feel like you're doing something. It allows you to show off to your friends, because you can invite them over to your basement and let them go and try out the story until they go, "This is stupid. That wouldn't happen. I would do it." But it allows you to show off a little bit about what you're doing.
Yeah.
So but it didn't take a lot of time to want to do something a little bit more than a choose your own adventure story, partially because once people go through it once, it's kind of then they're done. And if I had the skill, I would have gone and tried to make a shoot 'em up game, but I could never figure out how to do the graphics to make that work. So instead, it was, how can I make an educational game? What is there that can be done on the education front? Because a lot of what I was seeing, at least as a sixth grader, was that there wasn't much out there on the educational front, especially in English language instruction. That there was a little bit on math, there's a little bit on teaching programming, but there wasn't much on English language. So this is where it comes into the Silent E program. So I had the sort of, it's an extension of the choose your own adventure story, is how can I go, and instead of having it just be text-based, let's go and have it be somewhat animated, to go and have, you can draw pictures. And I think it was on the Atari, there was one of the antic structures where you could have a drawing at the top and a text box at the bottom.
Yes.
And so you could go and have, it made it programmingly very easy to go and draw out a picture and then tell the story simply at the bottom. So the idea of the Silent E program is that, one of the quirks of the English language is that you have short words that when you put an E on the end, they go and make the vowel sound turn into a long sound. That a can, if you put an E on the end, becomes a cane. And then there's a whole series of these. Mm-hmm. My younger brother at the time, Daniel, so this would be about 5 or 6 years old, and just learning language, learning how to do proper reading. And so this seemed like a fun way to introduce it to him. Not that in truth he really cared, but it gave me a motivation to go and try the programming. And so we had this little simple story of Tim going to the planet Eop as, on his rocket ship, and you can go and have your little rocket ship climbing down, and and going and greeting the letter E's who would go and join up at his spaceship. And it's in 1981, they were not bad graphics. 1982, they were not bad graphics. And basically it was a animated story. And so, and Tim would come with his can of beans that would turn into a candy cane. He would go and relax in his tub, and the E's would come by to visit him, and it would turn into a tube. And you would have all these series of misadventures as Tim was going around, and the letter E's would come up to go and greet him, and misfortune would befall him. Tim himself turned into a timepiece. His great plans turned into a plane and flew away. It was a fun story.
Sounds cute.
At the end of sort of writing it, there was a whole bunch of, I went and talked to my 6th grade teacher, saying, hey, could you help me come up with any other words that were missing and how we could possibly go and make a, after the story, a list of the words that the teacher could work with. And so Mrs. Hellwig stopped the whole class, and we went the whole class had a brainstorming session on all the different words that we could come up with. And in retrospect, it was kind of interesting because there was an animated discussion about, are some words inappropriate? That do we need to go and make certain that some words just don't belong? That rap turning into rape, that does not belong in this list, and we're not going to put it in there. Damn turning into a dame, again, that had sexist overtones, and we're not going to have that as part of any instructional. So, but even early on, the idea of you need to make boundaries in programming, enforce those boundaries was in people's mind. Another one that we had, a lot of discussion on is the word on that turns into one, that doesn't really follow the phoneme rules, but does that belong on the list? And after a discussion, we decided that yes, it did. But we're going to go put it at the very end. So that's the very last one that a teacher would get to.
And that was one of the ones called out in the letter that you sent me.
Yes.
Some other teacher thought that maybe it didn't belong in your list.
Right. But it was interesting that it was a recognized concern, and that equivalent good people, when that the answer is not clear.
Sure. So that's interesting that your teacher took time out of class time to bring everyone in. Let's discuss this this thing that you're making.
Correct. And Mrs. Helwig was one of the better teachers that in the elementary school, but also she was somewhat excited that somebody was doing something with computers, and that the idea of being, how can we go make this work, was something she was excited about.
Right. Okay. So you made this program. How long did it take you think? Weeks, months?
Probably a couple months, just trying to figure it out. And part of the challenges was my geometry skills had to get better to be able to go and draw the pictures. That, if I wanted to go make a cane with a nice curve to look like a candy cane, I had to go learn trig to figure out how a sine cosine function works to be able to go draw it. So there was a bit of storyboarding for the story and the pictures, as well as the limitations of having to improve the limitations of my math so that I could go and actually draw the pictures.
Mm-hmm. And was the story the same every time? How much interactivity was there?
Very little interactivity. That it was sort of an animated version of a storybook. Okay. So it was really not very little choose your own adventureness to it. A little bit of choose your own adventureness in terms of being able to determine the sequence at which things were going, but there weren't very many animated panels, so you wound up getting to all the sequences anyway, and so it's just a change in sequence. Mm-hmm. And the last one was always Tim turning into a timepiece.
So what did your brother think of this? Did it help him? Did he care?
He didn't really. He's a 5 or 6 year old who he enjoyed being able to use the computer, but to a large extent, by the time the computer program was done enough that he would be ready to use it, this had been such a part of dinner table conversation that he was familiar with the concept. He was familiar with all the words. That it was for him, from his point of view, it was done at that point.
Sure. All right. So how did this go from a personal project for you to becoming something that you entered into a science fair?
So that was 6th grade when I was making it. In 7th grade, the middle school had a science fair program. And so I had in 6th grade, I had sent the Silent E program to the 2 school systems in Virginia that I knew that I could found who used Atari computers. One was in Poquoson, in the Tidewater, Virginia. One was in Arlington, up near Washington, D.C. And sent them copies of the program, as well as a teacher's guide for how to use it. And the Poquoson school system did use it. And eventually they sent back the students' papers where they were going and evaluating the program for me and what they learned and didn't learn from it, and whether they thought it was stupid or not, but which is the range of expressions that you get from feedback columns today. Sure. It hasn't changed. But the other, so looking for what is a reasonable science fair program, part of it was being able to go and have this educational software that you had a teacher's plan for it. It had how to use it, and it had some feedback for how the students were using it. And so it was, and especially in retrospect, it was a solid science fair project that, we got best in show on the district level and did well at the state level. So it worked well.
Nice. Did you have the thing where the judges come around and ask you about your program and discuss that?
Absolutely. And how do you program it, and how do you go and draw things? And yes, that was fun. That to a large extent that it showed that I like going and creating technology and being able to go and explain it out. And that's kind of how I'm wired. And so that's a neat thing to figure out early.
Nice. And you won Best of Show, and then was that the end of it?
And to a large extent, that was basically the end of the Silent E program. I had it around, and so as part of middle school computer programming class, the teacher at the middle school said, "Michael, there's nothing I'm going to teach you that you don't already know. Why don't you just go program whatever you want on the computer?" So I reprogrammed that onto an Apple II. I had a version of it on an Apple II as well. And truth, I was able to go in, even in high school, there was a computer contest that I went and put that 7th grade program in, and it still won prizes. And so I got a CD player out of it in high school. So
nice.
To a large extent, that particular program, it's done, and what's next?
The article that I found about you, it said it was an Atari program, and the photo was of you sitting in front of an Apple II, but it was actually your program then running on the Apple II. It was the conversion you did. Nice.
Yes. And so being able to port it over, that the Atari was a much easier computer to program than the Apple, but learning how to do different things was part of the reason.
Sure. Did you do any other projects with your Atari for science fairs or just otherwise?
Right. So other programs that I wrote a series of math programs where you would go and you were sort of advancing this football player down the field, and you would be given math problems, and you would have a simulated player that you were competing against the computer who would get the math problems right 80% of the time. And so if you got your answers right more often, then you could go faster than the computer character. And if you didn't, then the computer character won. And so if there were roughly 10 correct answers, then one of the other of you would get to the end. There was another spelling program where it would go and flash the word onto the screen and then ask you to go and spell it. We also sent that to the Poquoson School District, who gave feedback that it was useful for those who were somewhat dyslexic or had reading troubles, that being able to see the word and then having to type it in just directly afterwards, that sort of drill was useful. One of the other things that I tried doing with the Atari was to see if I could go and make a business out of it. What I tried to do was to go and see if I could go make a business out of printing mailing labels. And so the local Oriental rug shop sort of made friends with me. We bought a couple of rugs from them, gave us their list of customers, and I wrote a simple database program so that we could go and type in the names and addresses into this database and have it saved so that you can go and print it out multiple times on the roll of mailing labels. Writing a database program was kind of fun. Data entry is just work. And so my mother, being the good sport she is, would help me go and type in addresses. But one of the other challenges, actually there were two challenges. One is it was hard to get the exact right spacing on the roll of on the labels, and so periodically you'd wind up sort of drifting off that label, and so you'd wind up printing across the label. There wasn't a way to recenter if you didn't quite have your spacing right. And the other real problem was that the Oriental Rug Shop was really wanting not just to go and have me type in the list of names that they had, but to go and use the computer to go and come up with more names that they could possibly go mail it to, which is something you can do now, but at the time was well beyond. But they didn't know, and
they didn't understand the capabilities of the tech at the time.
Right.
Yeah.
That. Similarly, I had a assistant principal at the middle school. I would go and write up my English papers on Letter Perfect on the Atari, and I would type them out and send them in. And the assistant principal called in the teacher to fuss at her. How dare you have these students? You're supposed to be doing an English teacher, and you should be doing writing assignments. And here you have the computer doing the writing for the kids. Again, not understanding the capabilities of computers, and that it was a typewriter, not that the computer was writing the short stories. So
Sure.
there was a fair bit of not knowing how computers really worked at the time.
Sure. Are there any chance that any of these programs that you wrote still exist?
I would expect not. I gave up my Atari when I went to college. That Virginia Tech gave me a full ride, and part of that was they gave me a IBM equivalent PC, and so for engineering school, and that meant the Atari got left behind. And my parents keep a lot of things, but there is a limit to how much they're willing to keep.
I don't know. They seem very tolerant with your interest in computers, so at least they were.
Right.
Well, if those discs ever show up, let me know, and we'll save your data. We'll get it off there.
Okay. There should be a copy at the Library of Congress, because I went and got it copyrighted and sent a disc in.
Nice. So that's not something that every 10 or 11-year-old would do, to go ahead and copyright their program. Do you know why did you do that?
Because I wanted to go and see if anybody would go and use it, if I could go and sell it. And so everybody else's program had a little Circle C on it, so it was $20 or something. So why not?
Sure. And did you try to find a publisher?
I did try to, and actually with the Atari, I could not find out who would want it. In pre-internet searching times, I didn't know what to do with it. The version I wrote for the Apple, it was clearer where to go send it, and Apple did not have interest in it. So that kind of ended that. Oh, the other thing I wanted to give a shout out to in early high school was the Peninsula Atari Computer Enthusiast Club. This was it was on the peninsula of, from sort of on Tidewater, Virginia, and aimed at a wide range of people. But it was held, they met at the NASA Langley facility, although most of the people were not NASA members, not NASA employees. And there was a series of meetings on sort of mostly showing what the computer could do and people talking about it. And one of the things that they taught was an assembly language, machine learning language class there, which was able to learn machine language through them. And not that I ever found a lot to do with it, but the idea of being able to learn alternate ways of digging deeper into the machine was just kind of fun for the ability to go and use it, as well as having modems that you could go and borrow to go and connect to the BBSs. And after connecting to the bulletin board systems, going and realizing that I like the programming aspect more than the social aspect of the computer.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Tell me about what you do nowadays.
So currently, I am an inventor working in the oil field. So my job is to come up with new technologies and figure out how to bury it at the bottom of the well. So my path to sort of getting here is, in high school, I worked at the particle accelerator facility in Hampton, Virginia, at CBAF, the Continuous Electron Beam Accelerator Facility, and did use Fortran to go and do modeling of the recirculating electron beams and on the deck facts there, and also sending it to the Cray supercomputers to be able to go and basically do Monte Carlo simulations of the electron beam recirculation. In college, I went to MIT's Aeroastro department for graduate school, and part of that was going and doing feedback control of how to minimize vibrations and how well those vibrations did they change in different environments. And so one of the things that the group did was on the 1997 Columbia mission, we were sending, we had an experiment up there, and we were programming the computer up there to go and do different feedback control algorithms and how the control algorithms change with zero gravity environments, which is important because if you're designing a space station, you need to make certain things don't vibrate too much. So what I do now is, again, so after Halliburton, where I work now, was looking for somebody who thought out of the box and was not necessarily constrained by reality. So somebody who could bring a different perspective to the oil field. And so things that I do now are from making computers that can work at downhole temperatures. At the bottom of the oil well is close enough to the center of the earth that it will be close to 400 degrees Fahrenheit down there. And so we're going and making specialized chips, as well as limited programming that you could go and actually store with those limited chips that can work at the bottom of the well. Also going and making fluidic computers that, instead of using silicon PN junctions to go and make your decisions, that you can go and use the viscosity of fluids to go and make decisions. And so one of the inventions is a valve that will go and detect whether the fluid coming into your well is oil or water based on the viscosity, and automatically restrict the water production and encourage the oil flow, and can do all of that with no moving parts, just using the logics of fluidics. So again, it's programming, but on a different level.
Sure. Not exactly Atari basic.
Correct.
Well, neat. So you have over 400 patents?
So I have between awarded and pending patents, I have 500 patents, yes.
Wow.
So I'm really good at starting projects and not so good at finishing them. So I'm really good at coming up with ideas, and I'm really glad to work with a larger group that can help me make them commercially viable. And you can kind of see that in a lot of the programming, that it's a lot of fun to go and make the program, to make a database, to go and make a spreadsheet, to go and do math homework, but to go and finish it, that starts to become work.
Sure. Yeah. It's like typing all those names in.
Correct.
From the rug company. You'd said in an email that the Atari 800 is the easiest computer to learn and is the computer you had the most fun with.
Absolutely.
In a whole career of using computers and craze and things, that's pretty incredible.
Because the computer was stripped down to its essence. That if you want to go load the BASIC program, then you go put the cartridge of BASIC in there and it's ready to go. That you turn the computer on and you start typing your program. You hit, and when you run the program, it just runs. That there's no layers on top of it. And that really it was just a really easy program to use. And at the time, everybody was learning how to go and run the program. So it was everybody kind of learning together in terms of what can you do with it? How can you make it work? And so it was, you felt like you had something to contribute even when you were 12 years old. And so that's made it a lot more fun than to now, if I'm going to go program something in C++, there's somebody out there that can do it a whole lot better and faster than I can. So you always feel like you're behind the curve. And with the Atari, you weren't, and it wasn't. And so, yes, it was by far the most fun computer that I've ever worked with, and by far the easiest computer on which to go and make basic programs. Nice. And to start with my kids, trying to go and get them to work on Python or Java, it's layers of program that you have to go use rather than it just being there and ready and accessible for them to go program.
Mm-hmm. So what haven't I asked you about the Atari days that I should have?
I think that's a lot of it. The other thing that was kind of fun is that our first television was the color television that we got for our Atari.
Wow.
That you needed a monitor, and you had to get a television set. So we got our first television set. The other thing that was a little fun is that my dad's, one of his requirements of helping to buy the computer was that we did not get any computer games. That any games you wanted, you would have to go and write yourself.
What a mean dad.
Which, having seen other people who get sort of sucked into their computer games, it's so it meant that anything you wanted to do, you had to do yourself.
Yeah. That's brilliant.
That's all the notes I had to go and talk about.
I think this is my last question then. If you could send a message to the people who are still playing with their Atari computers today, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
That they are a piece in the legacy and the continuum of the computer age. That I go and enjoy playing with medieval tools, and it is, again, part of that continuum. And the Atari is leap years ahead of that. But it's part of our history and our legacy, and it was one of the seminal milestone computers to go and that was part of that transition from the pre-computer age to where we are now. And at least for me, and I think for many others, it was an important piece and an important step in computerizing our culture.
Good answer. Thank you, Michael. I think I have what I need.
Thank you. This is a pleasure. Thank you. This is a lot of fun.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute, make a tax-deductible contribution to the Internet Archive, a nonprofit digital library that has done incredible things to preserve computer history. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate. Thanks.